Welcome back to Oregon Public Retirement. I'm your host, Daniel Ryan, certified financial planner and IRS enrolled agent, as well as author of the book, Oregon Public Retirement. This is the financial planning playbook for Oregon public servants, and it has 23 chapters chock full of the information you need to dive deeper into questions like we are answering here today. How do I even calculate my pension? Now today, in this video, I'm focusing on Tier 2 members only. I have a separate video for Tier 1 members and a separate video for OPSERP members. But for Tier 2, whether you're general service or police and fire, we're going to unpack how to calculate your pension. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you fall into this category of being a Tier 2 member, you were hired between January 1st, 1996 to August 28th, 2003, then you have two different ways to calculate your pension. Tier 1 has three different ways, and OPSERP only has one way. So this is why I made it specific to Tier 2 members only. The first way is going to be the least common for Tier 2 members, and that's what's called money match. Now, let's say, for example, that you were hired right there in 1996 and you actually contributed into your pension account for 7 years. Now, since 2004, you would have no longer been contributing to your pension account balance. That's true for everyone because then you started contributing into what's called your individual account program, which does not factor in the pension calculation. If you did have 7 years and then you stopped working in Oregon, then you would have been vested because that takes 5 years to vest. And maybe you went and worked in Washington or California for a while. And then you come back to age 60, which is the normal retirement age for Tier 2 members if you're in general service. And you might say, hey, I have this other pension from a different state that I ended up working in, but I also want to go see what I'm going to get from Oregon as a Tier 2 member. And what you would find out is that you are almost certainly what we call money match. And that's because it takes into account two different factors. It takes into account your age, and it also takes into account your account balance. Well, if you had actually contributed into your account for 7 years, then your salary back then is not going to be a major factor, and neither are your creditable years of service, which would be full formula type of style, right? So if you didn't have very much in service, only 7 years, then it's not a big deal because what you did is you primed the pump, so to speak, for your guaranteed 8% per year on the 7 years worth of contributions you made. So it's very likely that if that be your circumstance, you are in fact going to be under the money match calculation. So the question becomes, well, yeah, but how do I actually calculate what that is going to be worth? Well, let's take an example. Everyone has a different, what we call actuarial equivalency factor, but it's based on your exact age when you retire. If you're age 60, that is going to be a factor of 0.0068. You multiply that times your account balance, which is on your PERS statement each year. And once you multiply that, let's say it's $375,000, which for Tier 2 member is not typical, but maybe you had a big salary, maybe you were a battalion chief or something like that, and you were doing pretty well back then. Well, wonderful. We take that account balance, and that would get you an amount of $2,550 per month. If you then multiply it by 2, that's called the match, the money match. And that would mean that your pension is actually going to be $5,100 per month for the rest of your life. Now, how did we come up with that? Well, we take your actuarial equivalency factor, and that's based on your age. So if you're age 60, that's your AEF. If you're age 55 or you're age 65, it's going to be higher or lower. The older you are, that benefit goes up drastically, because PERS is doing the same thing that Social Security does. If you don't take your Social Security at 62, you wait till 70, it goes up almost double. Well, PERS does something similar with this AEF concept. If you have an account balance that's continuing to grow at a guaranteed rate of return, which now it's 6.9%, but subject to change each year, that guaranteed amount is going to continue to go up, as well as your age is going to continue to go up. And if you're at least age 60, if you have less than 30 years, then you will be able to get that account balance times your AEF, which both could have gone up from age 60 to 65, let's say, and you'll get an even bigger pension from PERS. So that's how the program works. It's a little complicated because it's not as simple as saying your salary times years of service, which are typically things that you can keep, off the top of your head. But nobody knows what their AEF is. They didn't even know that existed. You have to search a 200-page document in the PERS website just to find your AEF, which is why I use one example. And age 60 is the normal retirement age of a Tier 2 member. So if you have less than 30 years, you want to probably wait till age 60 to take anything from the PERS pension. You also still have the option to do what's called a total lump sum distribution. Now, for Tier 2 members, it's very rare that I would recommend that. And that's because your account balance is not as large. You only contributed into a maximum of 7 years, but some Tier 2 people only contributed for about 6 months because they were hired right at the tail end of 2003. Cashing out your balance or doing the refund annuity option is not typically advised for a Tier 2 person, but now you understand at least how the money match calculation factors in all of your different age and account balance and the match itself. So that's how money match works. Now let's switch gears for a second to the second way your pension could be calculated. Now we have to understand the reason we need to know this calculation in the first place is because even if you're going to retire in 10, 15 years from now, how do you answer the question, am I on track to retire? Should I be using my sick time during the time that I'm actually working? Or does my union contract allow me to get paid out my sick time? Or maybe your employer doesn't have a union relationship and they just pay it out automatically. Well, these are factors that you want to understand before you just run into this retirement 90 days and then figure out, I should have been using my sick time, or I'm going to get it paid out, so I should have saved it, or I should have gotten different years of service factored in and maybe not taken that leave of absence, or I should have used sick time so that I was a paid leave of absence. All of these questions while you're working make huge considerations when you actually get to retirement. So that's why we like to know where we're going, and it gives you that confidence to answer the question, am I on track? Is this going to be okay? Am I going to have a confident retirement? That's why we got to know ahead of time. Now, that being said, full formula is the other calculation method, and that one is by far the most popular. Certainly 100% of OPCERT people will have this, but for Tier 2 people, it's about 95, 85% of you are going to fall into this category of full formula. So we better spend our bulk of the time on that calculation. Now, that calculation in particular takes into account 3 factors for a Tier 2 person. That is your final average salary, your years of creditable service, and a factor of 1.67% if you're general service. If you're in police and fire, it's a factor of 2%. That also includes deputy district attorneys, by the way, which is a new legislation that came out just a couple of years ago now. If you're in general service, like most PERS members would fall into that category, if you take 1.67% and you multiply that by 30, that is 50.1%. So 50% of your final average salary is your pension for life. And that's how simple it can be. If you want to know more about what's going on in this calculation for final average salary, I did a whole separate video just on that calculation. But just so you know, for a Tier 2 person, that is actually how you factor this, is you say, okay, I've got my salary of maybe $100,000. I did 30 years of service and I have a factor of 1.67%. I will get about $50,000 per year from PERS for the rest of my life, which is just maybe a little over $4,000 per month. That's how simple it can be. Now, if you go into this depth of, should I purchase wait time? Well, Tier 2 people, you can still buy back your wait time. OPCERT people cannot. What about my sick time? Well, for Tier 2 people, you can't consider vacation time like Tier 1 can, but you can consider your sick time. And you get paid half credit into the calculation, and that allows you to boost your final average salary. So be sure to watch that video on final average salary if you're in the full formula calculation. Now, let's talk about strategy with either one of these calculations. If I know that I'm money match, again, going back to the most common example, someone who worked for all 7 years in Tier 2 and maybe they just left and worked somewhere else. They have another pension or they're just in the private sector. Well, in that case, you delaying your pension because of your age will continue to boost the pension. So if you're age 60 and you say, hey, I'm eligible to get the pension at the full calculation, yes, that's true. But if you're still working the other job, maybe you don't need the money yet. It could go from $2,000 to $2,500 in 5 more years, or whatever that math comes out to. That's why we would want to check your AEF and do the assumed guaranteed interest rate of 6.9%, which is what it is now, used to be 8%. And that is how we will begin to factor whether it makes more sense for you to still delay the pension. If you are in full formula and you're done working at 60, there is no reason to not take the pension at that exact moment in time, because you will then be leaving the money on the table. Your salary's not going to go up. Your years of service won't go up. So we don't benefit from delaying the pension. There's not a guaranteed assumed interest rate, and there's not a guaranteed actuarial equivalency factor to continue going up as you age. So for that reason, full formula, you wouldn't want to let that sit there. You would want to take the benefit and then start getting that monthly distribution as soon as possible. What are the strategies for the full formula, folks? Well, if you can boost your income during certain years, for tier 2 people, you are going to take the highest 3 years or the last 36 months of your career, and they do not need to be consecutive for tier 2 people. So let me give you an example. If you wanted to be a school administrator and you wanted to do it for 3 years, or maybe you wanted to do the extracurriculars, maybe you do that as well. And then you say, well, I'm kind of done with this. They're going to take those high 3 years of whatever your best 3 years were, and they're going to use that as your final average salary. And then you could go part-time on one side of the extreme to the other. You could be a part-time employee from age 55 to 60 and still get full years of creditable service, but not have to worry about getting the benefit of that last 36 months, because they're going to cherry pick. They're going to take your highest 3 years from whenever you were doing the school administration stuff, or you were doing the extracurriculars, teaching summer school, taking on extra hours if you're police and fire. So all of those factors come into an account here on the full formula side that really had nothing to do with your money match side. So that's why it's important for you to know, how do I actually calculate this out? That first answers the question, am I on track to succeed and have a confident retirement? But then once you know the rules to the game, you can finally win the game. If you're police and fire or a deputy district attorney, you fall into the same categories and same considerations, but your factor is 2% instead of 1.67. And that basically means that you hit the 50% of your salary marker sooner. 5 years sooner, technically. So you can do 25 years and then retire with the full pension as long as you're over age 50. That's the only other consideration you want to make sure for police and fire. But if you hit 30 years, you can retire whenever you want to as a tier 2 member, police and fire, or general service, which means that if you started at 22 and you're 52, you can actually retire with the full calculation benefit. But what if you actually took some time off, or you were working somewhere else? Well, then you'll need to wait till you're 60 if you're in general service, okay? So that's how this works with the different folks and actually calculating the pension. If you wanted to wait till you're age 60, your pension would go up if your full formula still, because if at age 55, let's say, and you only have 27 years of service, well, then you say, I want to be done at age 55. Probably want to wait to take your pension for 5 more years still, because that's going to be your normal retirement age, and your pension will go up. More like saying it won't be penalized is really what would happen if you took it at 55. So all of these considerations are going to make this answer to what seems like a simple question into a complex answer. How much am I going to get from my pension benefit? For most of you, I like to simplify it and say probably about 50%. If you're just looking for an off-the-cuff type of number. If you're looking for all the considerations that it really does take to calculate your pension appropriately, I recommend reading the chapter on my book about general service or police and fire, and it will walk you through all the different considerations. Or if you'd like more of a personalized touch and maybe someone to walk through this with you, don't hesitate to reach out to us at ryanfinancialsolutions.com. Be happy to schedule a free phone call and just get a consultation and see how we might be able to help. Thank you for all you're doing for our great state of Oregon. And until next time, happy planning.